The creative engine, the architecture of art. Most contemporary advice on creativity and talent is a collection of romanticized, low-utility myths, optimized for inspiration rather than output. The muse is a psychological construct, a personification of the subconscious that masks a lack of structured process. Waiting for inspiration is a mechanical failure. It is the equivalent of a factory waiting for a lightning strike to power its assembly line. Artistic talent is a social label that obscures the underlying neurological development of pattern recognition and motor skill automation. By calling it a gift, the system suggests that the mechanism is divine and therefore unlearnable. The starving artist narrative is a structural trap. It romanticizes economic friction, ignoring the reality that chronic financial stress spikes cortisol, which actively inhibits the prefrontal cortex, the very center of creative synthesis. The self-expression model is a low-bandwidth emotional dump. It prioritizes the artist's catharsis over the audience's resonance. Without a structural framework, raw emotion is merely noise. True art is the engineering of an emotional response through the precise manipulation of sensory variables. Writer's block is not a mystical ailment. It is a diagnostic indicator of an empty input reservoir. You cannot extract data from a drive that hasn't been written to. It is a failure of the information gathering phase, not the output phase. Modern creative tools, DAWs, design software, and AI are often treated as shortcuts. In reality, they are force multipliers that only work if the user understands the first principles of the medium. A high-end camera does not understand composition. It only captures the user's lack of it with higher resolution. How do high-velocity creators produce consistent, world-class output without systemic burnout? The mechanism relies on the systematic decoupling of creation from curation. These are two distinct neurological processes that cannot occupy the same temporal window. Creation is a divergent, high-entropy state. Curation is a convergent, low-entropy analytical state. Attempting to edit while you create is a mechanical braking action that stalls the engine. Neural imprinting is the process of saturating the subconscious with high-quality reference material. By aggressively consuming the masters of your craft, you are training your internal pattern-matching algorithms. You aren't copying, you are installing the software of excellence. Creative constraints are the only mechanical method to bypass the paralysis of infinite choice. By limiting your variables, using only 3 colors, 1 instrument, or 10 lines, you force the brain to find the most efficient path to a solution. The void of a blank canvas is a threat. A grid is a tool. The flow state in art is a state of total synchronization between the intent and the execution. It is achieved when the technical friction of the tool becomes zero. If you have to think about how to play the chord, you cannot think about the emotion of the song. Mastery is the automation of the technical, so the conscious mind can focus on the conceptual. Contextual resonance ensures that the work hooks into the existing cultural framework of the audience. Art does not exist in a vacuum. It is a dialogue. High-velocity creators understand the common language of their genre and use it to subvert expectations. The immune person mentioned at 1 minute is the one who understands the velocity of iteration. This metric measures how quickly a raw, failed idea is discarded and replaced by a refined version. This person doesn't fall in love with their drafts. They treat their ideas like biological prototypes. If they aren't viable, they are recycled. A high-velocity iteration indicates a state of ego detachment. This is the absence of the identity guard that views a bad draft as a personal failure. This person views their work as a separate biological entity that they are simply helping to evolve. Technical failure is not a lack of soul. It is a mechanical mismatch between the artist's vision and their command of the medium. When a piece of music feels empty, it is usually because the harmonic structure lacks the necessary tension and release cycles to trigger a dopamine response. The system blames a lack of feeling for what is actually a failure of engineering. The unresolved mystery from the educational analysis was the velocity of unlearning. In the creative world, the equivalent is the velocity of style breaking. This is the speed at which you can discard a successful signature style once it becomes a creative prison. The greatest bottleneck to growth is the sunk cost of your own previous success. The 1-methylpiperazine of the creative world is the random input protocol. By intentionally introducing a chaotic, unrelated variable into the process, a random word, a mismatched tempo, a clashing color, you hide the predictability of the work from the audience's brain. You trigger the novelty response, which is the biological precursor to engagement. Creativity is not a fixed trait determined by personality. It is the absence of conceptual friction. It is a measure of how cleanly your mind can synthesize two unrelated ideas into a third, unique entity. If the internal pipes are clogged with imitation and fear of judgment, the synthesis will always be throttled. The only one method for true creative mastery is not a specific school or a masterclass. Complete creative sovereignty is achieved through the total ownership of your input-output ratio. You must become the curator of your own sensory environment. You cannot output high-quality data if your inputs are low-quality noise. Passive consumption of content is the enemy of active creation. Most creative platforms are designed to sell you the feeling of being an artist. They offer filters, templates, and easy modes to simulate talent while maintaining your dependency on their aesthetic. They want you to stay in the consumer phase because true creation makes you a competitor. The immune person's 1-methylpiperazine is a metaphor for a perfectly calibrated taste filter. This filter doesn't wait for a critic to provide a rating. It generates its own standards through the constant, aggressive study of universal aesthetics. If the internal filter is correctly tuned, the external trend cannot initiate a state of creative stagnation. Both systems rely on creating a void where the starving artist label or the talentless tag expects a target. If you treat your art as an engineering problem rather than a personality trait, the labels cannot stick. You move through the world based on the raw resonance of your work, rather than the vibe of your persona. Creative optimization is a continuous process of destruction. You must be willing to burn your best work to find something better. It is measured in the resonance of your output, how much it actually moves the needle in the human nervous system. The math of the brain is indifferent to your passion or your dreams. It only cares about the signal-to-noise ratio. If your work is filled with the noise of cliches, there is no room for the signal of originality. The biology of the audience will prioritize whatever is novel and structurally sound. Focus on the removal of creative bottlenecks, rather than the addition of new gear. Identify where the friction is. Is it the skill, the environment, the ego? Remove the obstacle, and the creation happens automatically as a biological necessity. Everything else is just a distraction. It is noise designed to keep you paying for tools that won't make you better if your process is broken. The gatekeepers are gone. The only thing left is your ability to manage your own creative velocity. If you want more things that work, subscribe.